Scholars today are convinced that the reason we have discrepancies such as these is because these books were not written by eyewitnesses who accurately recorded the things that happened. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are writing decades after the life of Jesus. Decades later. Probably the first gospel was Mark, maybe around the year 70. I'll be surprised if Craig and I are very different on this. We may be. But almost everybody puts the Gospel of Mark around the year 70 or so. Matthew and Luke maybe around the year 80 to 85. John maybe around the year 90 or 95. In other words, these Gospels are separated from the life of Jesus by 35 to 65 years. 35 to 65 years. These Gospel writers were not the disciples of Jesus. These Gospel writers are writing in highly literate Greek. These are highly educated Greek-speaking Christians living decades later. They've heard stories about Jesus that they write down. The stories have been in circulation year after year after year after year by word of mouth. And most of the people telling the stories about Jesus year after year after year were not his disciples, but people who had converted to come to believe in Jesus, who were trying to convert somebody else, who then tries to convert somebody else, who then converts somebody else. Everybody telling stories about Jesus. Of course the stories got changed. When the Gospel writers wrote them down, they had their own agendas, and so they changed the stories on occasion in those contexts as well. The stories got changed. That's okay if what you're interested in is the religious significance of the story. But if you're interested in historical accuracy, you don't want stories to change. You want to know what really happened. Sometimes the differences are not discrepancies in detail. Sometimes they're differences in emphases that really matter. I'll give you one example. Mark has a very powerful portrayal of Jesus going to his death. Jesus has been betrayed by one of his followers. He's turned over to Pontius Pilate. And during his trial, Jesus doesn't say anything to Pontius Pilate except Pilate says, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus says, "Su leges, you say so." That's all he says. He's taken out to be crucified. He doesn't say anything. He goes to the place of crucifixion. He's silent the entire way. They nail him to the cross and he's silent. You get the idea of Jesus being in shock at what's happening to him. While he's on the cross, everybody mocks him. The Roman soldiers mock him. The people passing by mock him. Both other people being crucified mock him in Mark's Gospel. At the end, Jesus, who has been betrayed and denied and deserted and handed over and condemned and mocked, Jesus on the cross finally cries out, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani?" My God, why have you forsaken me?" And he dies. Jesus goes to a painful, humiliating death, unsure of why it's happening to him in Mark's Gospel. Contrast that with Luke's Gospel. In Luke, you have some of the same elements, but a very, very different emphasis. In Luke's Gospel, when Jesus is going to be crucified, he's not silent. He sees some women by the side of the road, and he turns his head to them, and he's carrying his cross, and he says to them, "Daughters of Jerusalem, don't weep for me. Weep for yourselves and for your children, for the fate that's to befall you." Here, Jesus isn't in shock, not wondering why this is happening. He's concerned about these people more than himself. While being nailed to the cross in Luke's Gospel, Jesus prays, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing." That's not in Mark, that's in Luke. While Jesus is hanging on the cross, it's not that both robbers mock him. One of the crucified people mocks him, and the other turns his head to the man and says to be quiet because Jesus hasn't done anything to deserve this. He then looks to Jesus and he says, "Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus replies to him in Luke, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." This is not somebody who's wondering why this is happening to him. He knows what's happening to him, he knows why it's happening to him, and he knows what's going to happen to him after it happens to him. He's going to wake up in paradise, and this guy's going to be with him. At the end, most telling of all, in Luke's gospel, instead of crying out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Jesus says, "Father, into your hands I commend my spirit," and dies. Jesus does not feel forsaken in Luke's gospel. This is a very different portrayal from the one you get in Mark. And the mistake people make is pretending that what Mark has to say is the same thing that Luke has to say. And that what Luke has to say is the same thing that Mark has to say. These are two different gospels with two different points of view. And if you smash them together into one kind of mega gospel, you have ruined the emphasis of each one. And then you throw in Matthew. And he says everything he said, not just in Mark, but in Luke, but also Matthew. Then you throw it in John, and you have the 7 last words of the dying Jesus, which are found in none of the Gospels. Now, you're free to do that if you want, to take all 4 Gospels and smash them together into one big Gospel. It's a free world. You can do that if you want. But realize what you're doing. You are writing your own Gospel, instead of accepting the Gospels that have come to you. Mark has a message that he wants to convey about Jesus, and it is different from Luke's message, and that's different from Matthew's message, and that's different from John's message. If you're interested in the religious value of these books, you have to let each author give you his message and not pretend it's somebody else's message. But what if you're interested not in the religious value of the book, but in the historical accuracy? If you're interested in historical accuracy, 4 discrepant accounts cannot be historically accurate. It can't work. It can't work with Gospels any more than it can work in a criminal courtroom, where you have eyewitnesses who say different things. You don't assume they're all right. You try to figure out which one is right. And that's what you do with the Gospels.